Dustin Blackwood slumped against the far wall of Crestwood Academy's science annex, his hazel eyes glued to the human anatomy chart hanging askew. At 16, he was lanky yet strong, with shoulders that appeared to bear a hidden burden. His clothes were always neat, though slightly worn, giving off the impression of someone trying to fade into the woodwork. Most kids at Crestwood had learned to ignore him, precisely as Dustin preferred. The chimes sounded, and pupils began trickling out for recess. Dustin deliberately gathered his books, biding his time to avoid the horde. He understood that timing was crucial for navigating the corridors unseen. Delay too long, and you'd be stuck with the teachers who might try to strike up clumsy chatter about why you seemed to lack friends. Leave too soon, and you'd be drawn into the whirlwind of teenage social games that Dustin had no desire to join. "Well, look who's still lurking," came a voice that made Dustin's grip tighten ever so slightly. The shadow of Crestwood Academy. Ethan Sterling stood in the doorway with his usual crew. At 17, Ethan was everything Dustin wasn't. Broad-chested, self-assured, with the kind of disarming grin that made teachers think he was a delight, and other pupils yearned to be in his inner circle. His blonde hair was always impeccably styled, and he sported his varsity jacket like a badge of honor. Behind him stood Kevin Riley, a burly ginger whose main qualification for Ethan's inner circle seemed to be his eagerness to guffaw at everything Ethan uttered, and Brianna Davis, whose biting sarcasm had reduced more than one pupil to tears. Dustin finished buckling his satchel and stood slowly. "Just going to recess," he said softly, his voice steady despite the familiar knot in his stomach. "Recess?" Ethan sauntered into the classroom, forcing Dustin to either squeeze past him or linger. "What do you even eat, anyway? I never catch you in the mess hall." Maybe he eats alone in the janitor's closet," Kevin chuckled, earning the laugh he was clearly angling for. Dustin had been eating recess in the art room every day for the past 3 months, ever since he'd enrolled at Crestwood Academy, when his mother's latest assignment had moved the family to Oregon. The art instructor, Mr. Abernathy, pretended not to notice when he unwrapped his bagel between the sculpture stands, and Dustin valued the quiet understanding. "I eat in the art room," Dustin said simply. "The art room?" Brianna arched an eyebrow. "Seriously, you really are a weirdo, aren't you?" The words stung, but Dustin had developed a resilience to casual malice over the years. Government contractor families moved often, and being the new kid was a recurring role. He'd learned that reacting only worsened things, and besides, there were worse things than being called names. Far worse things. "Excuse me," Dustin said, stepping toward the door. Ethan didn't budge. "You know what I think, Blackwood? I think you're hiding something. Nobody's this dull on purpose." If only you knew, Dustin thought. Aloud, he said, "I'm just trying to get through high school like everyone else." "Sure." Ethan drew out the word like he doubted it. "Well, perhaps we should help you get through it a little faster." The nudge was subtle, just enough to send Dustin staggering back a step. To anyone watching, it might have seemed like an accident, just Ethan moving past him. But Dustin felt the intent behind it, the probing of boundaries that would escalate if he didn't establish some kind of response. Dustin straightened his satchel straps and looked Ethan squarely in the eye. For just a split second, something flickered in his expression, something that made Ethan blink and take an involuntary step backward. Then it was gone, replaced by the same quiet resignation that everyone anticipated from Dustin Blackwood. "See you around," Dustin said, and walked past them into the corridor. The weeks that ensued established a routine. Ethan and his friends seemed to have made Dustin their plaything, finding small ways to make his life more challenging. A shoulder bump in the corridor here, a deliberately knocked-over book there. Nothing drastic enough to attract teacher attention, but persistent enough to wear down someone who just wanted to be left alone. Dustin endured it with the same stoic patience he'd learned watching his mother deal with difficult situations. Dr. Eleanor Blackwood had served multiple tours overseas, and she'd taught her son that sometimes the best response to provocation was no response at all. Choose your battles, she'd always said, and when you do choose one, make sure you're fighting for something worthwhile. The problem was, Dustin wasn't sure anything at Crestwood Academy mattered enough to fight for. The escalation came on a Wednesday morning in December. Dustin was heading to his first period history class when Ethan appeared beside him, matching his pace. "Blackwood," Ethan said casually, "I've been thinking about you." Dustin kept walking, his eyes fixed ahead. "See, I've been trying to figure out your deal. New kid, keeps to himself, never causes trouble. But there's something about you that doesn't quite add up." They reached the stairwell, and Ethan's friends materialized as if on cue. Kevin blocked the path ahead while Brianna positioned herself to cut off any escape. "I think," Ethan continued, "you're scared of us." Dustin stopped walking. "I'm not scared of you." "No?" Ethan's smile broadened. "Then prove it." The dare hung in the air between them. Dustin could feel other pupils beginning to notice, forming the kind of loose circle that appeared whenever teenage drama threatened to unfold. He saw faces he recognized from his classes, kids who'd never spoken to him, but were suddenly very interested in what he might do next. "I don't have anything to prove," Dustin said. "See, that's where you're wrong." Ethan reached out and flicked the history textbook from Dustin's grasp. It hit the floor with a dull thud that echoed through the stairwell. "I think you have everything to prove." Dustin looked down at his textbook, then back up at Ethan. The smart move was to pick up the book and walk away, take the minor humiliation and avoid whatever Ethan was building toward. That's what he'd been doing for months, and it had worked well enough. But as Dustin bent to retrieve his book, Ethan's foot came down on top of it. "Leave it," Ethan said. Something shifted in Dustin's posture. It was subtle, a slight tensing of his jaw, a barely perceptible change in the way he held his shoulders. But Ethan, who had made a study of reading weakness in others, noticed it immediately. "Problem, Blackwood?" Dustin looked up from his crouched position, and for the second time, Ethan saw something in the other boy's eyes that made him uncomfortable. It was fleeting, but not before Ethan felt an unexpected shiver run down his spine. "No problem," Dustin said quietly. He waited until Ethan lifted his foot, then picked up his textbook and walked away. But something had changed. The kids who'd gathered to watch whispered among themselves as they dispersed. Ethan tried to recapture his confident swagger, but Kevin and Brianna both noticed he seemed unnerved. And Dustin, walking to history class with his textbook tucked under his arm, felt something stirring inside him that he'd kept carefully suppressed for months. It felt like his mother's voice, echoing from countless training sessions in their basement. "Patience is a virtue, son, but so is knowing when to unleash it." The breaking point came 4 days later. Dustin was eating recess in his usual spot among the painting supplies and clay models when he heard voices approaching the art room. Mr. Abernathy had stepped out for his own recess break, leaving the art room empty except for Dustin and a few pupils working on computers near the entrance. "I still think he's hiding something," Ethan's voice carried clearly in the quiet space. Dustin set down his bagel and listened. They were in the main area now, probably looking for him. "Maybe he's just strange," Kevin's voice suggested. "Some people are just strange." "No, it's more than that." Ethan sounded frustrated. "Did you see the way he looked at me yesterday? Like he wanted to, I don't know, like he was deciding something." They were getting closer. Dustin considered his options. The art room had a side exit that led to the back parking lot, but using it would mean abandoning his recess and his satchel. He could try to wait them out, but they seemed determined to find him. "There he is," Brianna's voice carried a note of triumph. Dustin looked up to see all three of them rounding the corner into his section. Ethan's expression was different today, less casually cruel and more purposefully aggressive. "Eating alone again, Blackwood?" Ethan asked, but there was no humor in it this time. Dustin carefully wrapped up his bagel and put it back in his lunch bag. "Just finishing up." "No, don't leave on our account." Ethan sat down across from Dustin at the small table. "We want to get to know you better." Kevin and Brianna flanked the table, cutting off easy escape routes. Dustin noticed that they'd positioned themselves so that anyone entering this section would have to walk past them first. "There's not much to know," Dustin said. "I don't believe that." Ethan leaned forward. "See, I've been asking around about you. Nobody knows anything about your old school, your family, nothing. It's like you just materialized here one day." Dustin said nothing. "That's not normal, is it?" Ethan continued. "Most people, when they transfer, they talk about where they came from. They try to make friends. They join clubs or sports teams. But not you. I'm just focused on my studies." "Bullshit!" Ethan's voice sharpened. "I think you're hiding something, and I think it's time we found out what." Ethan reached across the table and grabbed Dustin's lunch bag. Before Dustin could protest, Ethan had dumped the contents onto the table. A bagel, an orange, a water bottle, and a small photograph tumbled out. "What's this?" Ethan picked up the photograph before Dustin could reach for it. Dustin felt his heart rate spike. "Give that back." "Oh, look at this." Ethan held up the photo so Kevin and Brianna could see. "Is this your mommy, Blackwood?" The photograph showed a younger Dustin standing next to a woman in tactical gear. Dr. Eleanor Blackwood looked exactly like what she was, a seasoned professional with the bearing and confidence that came from years of leadership in high-pressure situations. "Your mum's in the military?" Kevin asked. "Special ops," Dustin said quietly, reaching for the photograph. Ethan pulled it away. "Special ops, huh? So what? She's deployed or something?" Dustin's hands clenched into fists under the table. "She's stationed overseas." "That's why you moved here?" Brianna asked. "Because Mommy got shipped out?" "Something like that." Ethan studied the photograph more closely. "You know what I think, Blackwood? I think you're trying to be tough like Mommy. I think that's why you've got this whole quiet, mysterious act going on." "I'm not trying to be anything." "No?" Ethan stood up suddenly, still holding the photograph. "Then you won't mind if I keep this for a while." Dustin stood up too, and for the first time since the confrontation began, Ethan remembered why something about Dustin Blackwood made him uneasy. Standing at his full height, Dustin was actually taller than Ethan had realized. And there was something in the way he moved, coordinated, poised, like he was constantly aware of his body's position in space. "Give me the photograph," Dustin said. "Or what?" Ethan challenged. "You'll call your mummy." "Oh wait, you can't. She's too busy playing soldier to take care of her son." The insult hit harder than any physical blow could have. Dustin felt years of careful self-control begin to fray. He thought about his mother, somewhere in a war zone right now, leading teams and making decisions that saved lives. He thought about the emails they exchanged, about the pride in his mother's voice when she called to check on Dustin's progress. "Last chance," Dustin said, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. Ethan heard the change in tone and felt that same uncomfortable shiver from the stairwell. But he was committed now, with Kevin and Brianna watching, with his reputation on the line. "I don't think so," Ethan said, and deliberately tore the photograph in half. The sound of ripping paper seemed impossibly loud in the quiet art room. Dustin watched the two pieces flutter to the floor, his mother's face separated from his own, the memory of a happy moment ruined by casual cruelty. Something snapped. Dustin moved faster than Ethan thought possible. One moment he was standing by the table, the next he had Ethan's wrist in his grip, applying pressure to specific points that made Ethan's fingers open involuntarily. "What the hell?" Ethan started to say, but Dustin was already moving again. In one fluid motion, Dustin swept Ethan's legs and guided his fall so that Ethan landed hard on his back with Dustin kneeling beside him, one hand pressed against Ethan's chest. Kevin started forward but stopped when Dustin looked at him. The expression on Dustin's face was nothing like the quiet, resigned boy they'd been tormenting for months. This was something else entirely, focused, dangerous, completely in control. "Don't," Dustin said quietly, and Kevin froze. Ethan was gasping, trying to process what had just happened. He'd gone from standing upright to flat on his back in less than 2 seconds, and he had no idea how. "You want to know what I'm hiding?" Dustin's voice was calm, conversational. "My mother didn't just serve in special ops. She was a Green Beret. Do you know what that means?" Ethan shook his head, afraid to speak with Dustin's hand still on his chest. "It means she was trained to go places other people can't go and do things other people can't do. And before she deployed this time, she spent 6 months teaching me everything she knew about taking care of myself." Dustin applied slightly more pressure, and Ethan's eyes widened. Krav Maga, Aikido, weapons training, survival skills, how to read people, how to control situations, how to end conflicts before they escalate. Dustin leaned closer. "The reason I don't fight, Ethan, isn't because I can't. It's because I know exactly what would happen if I did." Brianna had backed away until she hit the display case. Kevin was frozen in place, afraid to move. "You tore up a picture of my mother," Dustin continued. "A woman who's risking her life right now to protect people like you, people who don't deserve it." Ethan tried to speak but could only manage a gurgled sound. "Here's what's going to happen," Dustin said. "You're going to leave me alone. All of you. You're going to stop looking for me, stop talking to me, stop thinking about me, because the next time you decide to test me, I won't be as patient as I was today." Dustin released Ethan and stood up in one smooth motion. Ethan rolled onto his side, coughing and gasping for air. "And Ethan?" Dustin looked down at him. "If I ever see you bullying anyone else in this school, anyone at all, you and I are going to have a much longer conversation. Are we clear?" Ethan nodded frantically. Dustin picked up the torn pieces of his photograph and walked out of the art room, leaving Ethan, Kevin, and Brianna in stunned silence. The news spread through Crestwood Academy like wildfire. By the end of the day, everyone knew that quiet Dustin Blackwood had somehow pinned Ethan Sterling to the ground without breaking a sweat. The details varied depending on who was telling the story. Some said Dustin had used secret fighting techniques, others claimed he'd threatened Ethan with a weapon. But everyone agreed on the core facts. Ethan had started something he couldn't finish, and Dustin Blackwood wasn't who they'd thought he was. Ethan himself said nothing about what had happened. He couldn't explain how Dustin had moved so fast, couldn't describe the look in the other boy's eyes without sounding terrified. So he stayed quiet and avoided Dustin completely. Kevin and Brianna followed Ethan's lead, but they couldn't stop gossiping about it to other people. Within a week, Dustin had gained a reputation as someone you definitely didn't want to cross. The change in how people treated Dustin was immediate and profound. Pupils who had barely noticed him before now made eye contact in the corridors. A few even nodded or said hello. Teachers seemed to see him differently too, as if his willingness to finally stand up for himself had made him more visible to them. Dustin taped the torn photograph back together and kept it in his wallet. The repair was noticeable, a thin line running between him and his mother, but somehow that seemed fitting. Some things, once broken, could never be made exactly the same again, but they could still be precious. 3 weeks after the art room incident, Dustin was surprised to find Ethan waiting by his locker after school. "Blackwood," Ethan said, his voice hesitant. Dustin turned, his expression neutral. "Ethan, I wanted to..." Ethan struggled with the words. "What I did, with the picture, that was wrong." Dustin waited. I don't know why I did it. I guess I just... Ethan shook his head. I wanted to provoke you. I thought you were weak. I know. Ethan looked at Dustin for a long moment. You really could have hurt me, couldn't you? In the art room. Yes, but you didn't. Dustin adjusted his satchel straps. No, I didn't. Why not? Dustin considered the question. Because hurting you wouldn't have changed anything. It would have just made me like you. The words stung, but Ethan knew he deserved them. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. About your mom, about the picture, about all of it. Dustin nodded. Okay. Ethan started to walk away, then turned back. Blackwood, your mom would be proud of you. For how you handled it, I mean. Dustin watched Ethan disappear into the crowd of pupils heading for the parking lot. Then he pulled out his phone and typed a quick message to his mother. Had a good day at school today. Looking forward to your call tonight. The response came back within minutes. Proud of you, son. Always. Dustin smiled and headed home, walking taller than he had in months. He'd learned something important about himself in that art room. Not just that he could defend himself when necessary, but that he could choose how to use that ability. Strength without wisdom was just brutality, but strength with restraint, that was power. And sometimes Dustin realized the most powerful thing you could do was show someone exactly what you were capable of, then choose not to use it. That lesson, more than any fighting technique, was what his mother had really been trying to teach him all along. Response length, 20-38 characters.